Well, first of all, it's great to see all of you, and it's great to be back. My family lived on Stevens Street. The family had a business on Main Street in Nettleton for years. Gone now. My family home is still there. My brother lives in it. But I attended Nettleton School from the 5th grade through high school. It was a much smaller operation then. I think we graduated 35 people in my graduating class. And, you just didn't have the breadth of courses to offer, but it was a wonderful community and a great place to grow up, and it gave me the education that I needed to go on and do a military career and then a civilian career in the U.S. government in the civil service, and ending up as a U.S. ambassador to the nation of Bulgaria and a senior official in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Brussels. Now, the school was so much different than it is today. First of all, it wasn't diverse back in those days. The community was not diverse, and that's changed. And I want to say to minority students that are here, welcome to Nettleton High School. I am so pleased that you are here, and that this community has become diversified. And I am a big believer in diversity, because I think that's the strength of America, and you bring all groups together, give everybody equal opportunity, and it strengthens our country. So I think the diversity that's being brought to that exists in Nettleton High School today, I'm very proud of it as a Nettleton graduate, and I'm very pleased to see minority students here on the campus. I did a number of things. We had a beta club. I don't know if you have that now. We certainly didn't have a video. We had a mimeograph newspaper, and none of you, I bet, know what a mimeograph is. But it was, let me say, it was kind of a messy process that produced a printed paper once, I think it was once a week. And that's where I wanted to be a journalist, and so I was editor of the newspaper and the yearbook, and I learned how to write from the great teachers here. I also was interested in world history and world affairs, and that interest got me, I think, drew me into military service and to travel and live abroad. And I'm just fascinated with that, and always have been. And it started here in the history courses that I took at Nettleton High School. Now, I have to say something about basketball, because I was lucky enough to be on the state championship team in 1961. Jerry Rook was playing. You may have heard of him. He was a great athlete. The game today that's played in high schools and colleges is a completely different game than I played. I look at what the kids can do now, and I'm amazed at the athletic skills of them. I was a 6-foot forward and could barely touch the rim. Now these guys are high school or dunking a ball. But it was a very exciting time in sports. It was a very exciting time to be graduating from high school. I went on to Arkansas State, got my degree. Later on, when I was in the military, I was serving in Chicago and went to graduate school at Loyola University of Chicago. And all along the way, I felt like my education that I received here in this high school and in Arkansas State was more than adequate to help me move forward. Let me just say, I don't know how much you followed the current events. I would encourage you to follow current events. The United States is pretty isolated, really. I mean, we have all this media out there, television, internet, all the social media stuff. So you're flooded with information, but much of it is entertainment and much of it is local. But there's a big, wide world out there where big things are going on that affect the United States and affect you. In Europe, in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. And I would encourage you, particularly if you have an inclination toward world affairs and history, to get on the British broadcasting system or some of these international television outlets and just see what's going on in the world beyond the borders of the United States. We're kind of isolated by the big oceans on both sides of us. It's funny to me when I travel abroad sometimes, people in Germany may know more about our election process than we do, because the rest of the world is kind of focused on what's going on in the U.S. because what happens here affects them, and so they pay attention to us. And we should do likewise, because there are events in Korea, in China, with the Russian stuff that's going on now. It will affect you in the future, and you're going to be asked to make decisions through voting or through expressions of opinion that are important. And world affairs, I think, is a very important thing. I don't want to just stand up here and chat off the top of my head and tell war stories, although I can do that. But I'd be interested if anybody has any questions or comments. Just let me know, and we'll talk about it. Anything. We can talk about military stuff. We can talk about U.S. intelligence stuff. We can talk about diplomacy. We can talk about the media. I have quite a bit of experience in dealing with the media, and I see our friends from Jonesboro Sun back there. I've done quite a bit of international media because of the job I had. It's a fascinating experience. So, is there anything on any of your minds that you'd like to talk about? You want to talk? Yes, sir.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned your interest in world history and world affairs. If you have one, what's your favorite period in history?
Ooh. That's really an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it. Let me, instead of giving you a period, let me give you a place. I'm kind of drawn to European stuff because we lived in Europe for about 13 years, in Germany, in Belgium, and in Turkey. And there's some question about whether Turkey's European or not, but it's close enough for me. The Balkan area, and I don't have a map here in the book. Let me just tell you where the Balkans are. It's in southeast part of Europe, near Turkey. It includes Greece and Bulgaria and Romania and most of the countries of the former Yugoslavia. That area is fascinating because it has seen the comings and goings of the great civilizations of history important to the Western development of our city. This is an area that was the home of the ancient Greeks. Greece is part of the Balkans. It was a place where Alexander the Great came from. You had the Roman occupation of this area, so there was 1,000 years of Roman occupation, and then Byzantium and Constantinople, now Istanbul, as the song goes. They ruled the area for 500 years. You had the Austro-Hungarians. World War I was started in Sarajevo, Bosnia, where the Archduke was assassinated, and that triggered World War I. In the peace treaty in Paris in 1919 that ended World War I created the country of Yugoslavia that stayed together until 1989. The Nazi Germany occupied much of the area in World War II, and then the Soviet Union dominated it, not as much as some other places, but Russia dominated the area by the Soviet Union, and it did so until the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. So this area, rather than a period, I'm kind of fascinated by this whole area where all of these civilizations came and went. And it created very tough people because to survive all this, they had to build up very strong mechanisms for defending themselves and their culture. And it's a real mixture of cultures. Roman Catholicism, millions of Muslims live there. and Orthodox Christianity in the Slavic world. The Cyrillic alphabet that's used in Russia and all these Slavic countries was invented in the Balkans to spread Christianity in times of Byzantium. So this area, it's a long answer to it, but I'm more fascinated by an area than by one particular history. But generally speaking, I'm a Europeanist. I like Europe. Long answer to your question. Sorry, I rambled. Yes, sir.
Since you've been ambassador to Bulgaria, do you think the U.S. should be more involved in world affairs?
Yes, I do. we are. I said we are kind of an isolated country because of our oceans. You know, most of the world is not like us. And, you know, that sounds like a simple thing to say, but most of the world is not of one race. It's very diverse. Most of the world is not Christian. It's some other religion. Most of the world, you know, looks at events somewhat differently than we do. And we need to understand that because we live in this world and we are a leader in the world. Other countries look to us for leadership, and they look at our democracy and our economic success and all that, and we are kind of a model for them. And so they pay a lot of attention to us, and we should do the same, because if things go wrong in these places, it can have a big effect on us. Korea is a very dangerous issue right now, and I really think we're not unique in that we are looking inward. I mean, almost all countries see themselves as the center of the world. You know, when they put their maps up on the wall, their country's in the middle, and the rest of the world is around them. It's just a natural thing to do. Well, we do the same thing. We're totally focused on ourselves. I'm not totally focused on ourselves, but I would recommend everybody, you know, broaden your horizons and look beyond. Look outside of Nettleton High School, outside of Jonesboro, outside of Arkansas, outside the United States. Just keep it going, and find an area or a subject or something globally that appeals to you. And there's always something out there, and you know, stay connected. Okay. Anybody else? Sir. Yes, ma'am. Uh-oh.
So, can you speak a little bit about effective communication and credible media outlets and sources and the cautions to take?
Yeah.
When it comes to them, I mean, because they're going to see it more than even you did or I did, but as they get to professions and politics and whatever that looks like, what that means and what they're representing and the cautions.
Well, we have right now a very free-flowing, wide-open, Wild West kind of information world that all of you live in. I'm going to really show you how old I am, because I'm going to tell you that I can remember when the first television came to this town. How exciting that was, and you know, that's a long, long time ago. And the advancement in technology is breathtaking in my lifetime, from remembering the first television to what we have today, where you're totally connected. There's great advantages to that. The information available to you is wonderful, but there's also dangers in that system. Dangers in many ways, but one of them is that information is also a battleground, where big international issues are being fought through information. So a question came up yesterday about how do you decide what is legitimate information and what is manipulation? Somebody that's generating false stories in order to influence me in a particular direction. And I think you need to be very careful about where your sources are. I have a degree in journalism, and there were and are standards of reporting that I think are valid for all professional news outlets. and that is the professional news organizations are committed to truth and facts. Now, they may have commentary around them, but they double check their stories. They double check their sources. They're not they don't make it up. They have to have a source, and that source needs to be corroborated by other sources. Now, where do you find that? Well, you find it in what is now derisively called the mainstream media. Now, it can be liberal or it can be conservative or whatever the particular outlet might have on its editorial page. But the question is this an organization that's committed to the professional standards of information today? A conservative one is the Wall Street Journal. You have the major news agencies around the world, Associated Press, Reuters, and so forth. Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the big news magazines, Time, Newsweek, those organizations, the big television outlets that are committed to the facts on a particular issue. Now, within those, they may have commentary. You have NBC News facts. MSNBC is commentary mostly. They look at the facts and they give their interpretation of it. But start with the news. Where is a credible source of the news, and build from that. But be very careful of news sources that pop up that you've never heard of before. These fringe elements that are out of the mainstream, because you don't know who's behind that. You need to know who is behind the organization that's issuing the information that's available on the internet. Now, I think over the next few years, we're going to see some rules put on things like Facebook and Twitter and places where, they will try to prevent outside nations like Russia from generating false information in the United States to affect us one way or another. That happened. The Russians tried to affect our elections in 2016 because their goal was to disrupt democracy, disrupt the confidence in the democratic system, and separate the United States from our allies in Europe. So the only thing I would say is just be very careful about where you're getting your information. Try not to get it from one source only, but look at a variety of sources, and try to make sure that they are mainstream outlets committed to professional standards of journalism. And that'll keep you pretty straight. But all this conspiracy stuff that you see spinning around out there, a lot of that is self-serving, either political or by in some cases, foreign government. Yes, sir.
You talk about rules on social media like Facebook and Twitter. Would that impede First Amendment?
That's a question that's really interesting, and I generally come down on First Amendment rights, that wide open, But then I see, does somebody outside the United States see that as a vulnerability and use it to their advantage? If there's a way that we can keep it wide open, but that that it's coming from another government or that it's not necessarily legitimate, that would be the best solution. Because I generally don't believe that we ought to restrict the flow of information. But on the other hand, I'm very worried about all this stuff flying around out there in which people are trying to manipulate citizens of the United States for their own purposes. And so this is something that's going to be a big debate in your lifetime, and y'all are all going to have to decide where you come down on this issue. And it's not an easy one. Sir?
You mentioned NATO earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly was your role within all that?
Okay, first of all, does everybody know what NATO is? Yeah. This is an alliance of 29 countries. Its headquarters is in Brussels, Belgium. It is an international organization created after World War II to provide security for the central region of Europe because of the Soviet military threat to Central Europe. And it succeeded in defending Central Europe for 45, 50 years. It, at the end of the Cold War, NATO was looking for was it relevant anymore? But the nations of NATO, the United States, Canada, and the major democracies of Europe decided, yes, we want to have a common security structure. And it still exists to this day, and it's very relevant. NATO is now in Afghanistan. It used to have a training mission in Iraq. It was patrolling the Mediterranean and the waters off of Africa for pirates and stuff. So it was in Libya, so it has a much broader role. My job at NATO, NATO's headed by the Secretary General. It's called Secretary General. He is never an American. It's always from one of the European countries. And I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary General on the international staff, and my job was operations. So policy, not command, but policy, political policy that determined the political direction of the alliance is done in a council called the North Atlantic Council, and each nation has a representative there. And so the staff helps the North Atlantic Council do his job. And my job was policy. Mostly at that time it was on Afghanistan because NATO had forces in Afghanistan. And so I worked on NATO policy related to Afghanistan most, and sometimes Kosovo, but more often than not it was Afghanistan. Yes, ma'am.
What advice would you give my fellow classmates and you if they want to pursue a job like you have now?
Well, I had a very strange career. I went up through the military, and then I got out of the military and I went to work as a civilian in the Department of Defense. And then through a very strange set of circumstances, I got involved in the diplomacy in Bosnia. And then Richard Holbrooke asked me to go to the State Department. A conventional career, if you don't go the military route, the conventional career would be to get yourself a degree in some area that's of interest to the government. And then all federal agencies recruit people. If you get online this afternoon, you can look at Central Intelligence Agency, Homeland Security, the State Department, and so forth. And there will be a website, and it will tell you how they go about hiring people. In the case of the State Department, if you want to be a Foreign Service officer, and by the way, the Foreign Service is a great place for women. I mean, when I was there, Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State. Condoleezza Rice was there. We have U.S. ambassadors all over the world who are women, and women in key positions. The State Department is kind of far ahead of a lot of other agencies of government in gender equality. So it's a very good place. But for the State Department, you have to take a test, and it's a liberal arts test, and it's pretty hard. I've never taken it because I wasn't a Foreign Service officer, but everybody tells me it's tough. And then you get a good score on that test, and there are interviews and so forth, and so you go on up. There are careers in the Central Intelligence Agency. There are FEMA, Homeland Security, every big federal agency. Now, you're not going to get rich doing it, but you'll have an interesting career and a very nice life. And so, I encourage you to look into it. And you can start now. If you think you're interested in something, get online and look at it. They all have these websites that'll tell you how to go about applying, and they will also tell you what kinds of skills they're looking for, so that if that's the direction you want to go, you can reorient yourself. But I can tell you, when I left Nettleton High School and went to Arkansas State, I wanted to be a journalist. And I went to school in journalism, and the Vietnam War was raging, and there was a draft, conscript army. My dad was a World War II veteran, a corporal in the artillery, and he said, well, if there's going to be a war and you're going to have to go, maybe you ought to be an officer. So I went into advanced ROTC, and we left here in 1966, my wife and I, drove out of here with all the belongings we had in our car and headed off to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I had no idea at 21 years old the direction my life would take. So, I mean, you all have no idea what's ahead of you. Think big. Look at outside the community and see if that's what you want to do. Some people be perfectly happy here. Some people, may want to go out to Washington or Little Rock or someplace else. But there are a lot of opportunities, big world out there, and a lot of opportunities. I like the federal government. It was very good to me. I highly recommend it. You're not going to be a billionaire, but you'll have a comfortable life. Okay, sir.
Okay, so bouncing off of controversies and breaking news, and plus the fact you served in combat from Vietnam, what did you think about the Vietnam War back in the 60s, and do you feel differently about it?
Boy, where's the teacher? These are good, tough questions. In 1968, when they sent me to Vietnam, I went there in the summer of '68. If you know anything about the Vietnam War, you know about the Tet Offensive in the February of 1968 that really reversed the narrative, because up until then we thought everybody, the government and everybody was saying we were winning. But as it turns out, the Tet Offensive proved that that was not true. And the Pentagon Papers, which came out later, showed that the government was not being straightforward about that. In '68, when I was sent there, did I want to go to Vietnam? No, I'd rather not, but that was my duty. I had raised my hand in this armory up here and said, I swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the laws of the U.S. And so I had a obligation to my institution, the Army, and the law to go to Vietnam and serve, and I did that, and I did the best job I could. It was a very dangerous place. I was lucky. 50,000, 60,000 people were not lucky. I did not, when I was sent to Vietnam, and while I was there, I did not oppose the war. I thought it was the right thing to do, and we should be there and all that. And when you're in a zone, you're not really thinking about the big picture. You're thinking about your soldiers and your people that work with you, and you're trying to keep everybody safe as you can. When I came back, I went to teach ROTC at DePaul University in Chicago. And this was, I came back in '69. So in '69, '70, '71, '72, the country was really turning against the war. And the country had become very anti-military. I had a lot of hostility toward me as a military officer on a college campus because the college kids were not very happy about the thoughts of being sent there. But as a military officer, I had even if I didn't agree with the war, I had an obligation to do one of two things. If I so disliked that and I couldn't do it, then I had an obligation to quit, to resign. But as long as I stayed in the military, I had an obligation to follow the legal orders that were given to me. Now, since then, my attitude has changed a great deal. I think Vietnam was a big mistake. I think it was a kind of an inevitable mistake. I don't know how we could have avoided it, because in the 60s, the United States, through NATO, we had deterred Russia. We had contained Russia. And people looked at Vietnam as a spread of communism. And deterrence was our strategy. So it was consistent with our deterrence to go to Vietnam to prevent the South to fall into the communists, as we had done in Korea. So I think we went there with good intentions. It was much more difficult than we expected it to be. They were a very, very tough enemy, and frankly, we lost. at the cost of 60,000 lives. I look back on it now, I think it was a mistake. But think of the mentality at the time, it was a mistake that we probably couldn't avoid making because of the way we were thinking at the time. You know, we are a great nation, but great nations can make great mistakes. We are not perfect, and every now and then we make a big one. Vietnam was a big one. I think the second war in Iraq was another one. And again, I was a U.S. official. I was a U.S. ambassador in Bulgaria when we were recruiting countries to send troops to help us in Iraq. I was not in favor of that war, but I had a legal and constitutional obligation to follow the instructions of the president, and I was the personal representative of the president of the United States. So I did my job. I recruited Bulgaria to send troops to Iraq, even though personally I didn't think it was that good an idea, but I kept my mouth shut because I had the choice. I could resign my ambassadorship and be a page one story in the New York Times for one day, and destroy my career, or I could, follow the direction of my president, who I had a legal responsibility to support, and I did that. It's a personal choice. Yes, ma'am. Ooh, well, one of them I just mentioned a little earlier. I mean, we have lots of issues with diversity and race in the United States, but it is a lot better than it was, I can tell you, but living here in the 1960s. And I think there's still plenty of problems. And I'm disappointed in the direction of the president today because I think he's making mistakes in the issue of diversity and acceptance of some stuff that shouldn't be accepted. I believe, and I'm a strong supporter of the Black Lives Matter issue. It's a problem. I don't have a problem with football players kneeling because that's a way of protesting, and it's a legitimate way. But I can tell you that the race relations in the United States are so much better than they were in this town when I was your age. Opportunities exist that didn't exist, and I see kids doing great stuff. Other things, I think I look at the opportunities that are available, the information that's available to everyone, and it really has opened the world up to all of you, much more than we had. I mean, we had a local newspaper, and you could get the Memphis Commercial Appeal and a few other things, but right now you have so much more information. In the 1980, my wife and I, we were living in Turkey, and the way I got the news from the United States was I would walk out on my balcony in this city in Turkey with a shortwave radio, and I would turn till I could get the Voice of America, and the Voice of America would be where they were teaching people to speak English, so it was very like slow talking. They would say, "This is the voice," So you would listen to a news program that should have been 5 minutes would be 20 minutes because of the way they talked. And that's how I got information. That was 1980. In 2002, when I was U.S. ambassador to Bulgaria, next door to Turkey, I could get up in the morning, get on my computer, I could read the New York Times, Washington Post, news summaries, sports scores from, all that stuff. And I could do that before breakfast. So, I mean, you all don't recognize it because you live right in the middle of it, but the information flow to people out there is incredible. The question goes back to the legitimacy of the information that's available to you, and it's there's good news and bad news about all this information flow. The economy of the United States is much different than it was. This was a farming community. Really. There was one factory in this town, it was a shoe factory, and everybody else around here lived off of farming. When I started in elementary school over here, we had a split term school. You guys don't know what that is. Anybody here in here know what a split term school is? Right. It's because they needed labor to pick cotton. So we started school in July. It's wonderful. No AC, by the way. Brian, you don't remember this. You don't even remember this, do you?
I know what it was.
Well, we started school in July, went to school through the end of August, and then school would take a break September and October because that was the cotton picking season, and kids would go out and pick cotton and earn the money for their school clothes and their fees for the upcoming school year. So the economic level of the people here, I mean, this is a pretty poor place. And the nature of the school was so much different and so much more limited than you have today. So there's a big economic change. There's change in the way society works, big change in the information flow. I'd say those are the biggest things that I see. I mean, you guys have, is anybody else besides these two guys? Okay. There you go. I worked in the State Department for several projects, beginning in 1995. I went to the State Department at the request of Richard Holbrook. I was working in DOD, in Department of Defense, and Holbrook asked me to come over to the State Department. And so I worked on some stuff, some big projects there, and they gave me the rank of ambassador because I needed that to get the job done. So you can be an ambassador to a country, or you can just have ambassadorial rank for international stuff. So I had ambassadorial rank through the Clinton administration. Now, when the Bush administration came in, I had been working on the Balkans for years, and they had an opening, and they knew me. And every year there's a board that meets, chaired by the Deputy Secretary of State, and they pick people to be ambassador to the various opening countries that are opening. And so someone nominated me to be U.S. Ambassador to Bulgaria, and the board recommended that I do that. And so essentially the State Department picked me. And then you go through a long vetting process, so you fill out papers to give them your life story, and that goes over to the White House, because the person that picks the ambassador is the President of the United States, because ambassadors are a representative of the President. And then the President submits the name of that person to the Senate for Senate confirmation. So you have to be selected by the State Department if you're a professional, accepted by the White House, the President, nominated to the Senate, Senate confirms you, and then and also the country that you're going to has to say yes. And then you go out there and be the U.S. representative, and it is a wonderful experience, really. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So how have current state of affairs affected the U.S.'s position on the global stage?
You must have read my op-ed in the Jonesboro Sun yesterday. I'm concerned about the declining influence of the United States abroad right now. If I were still in government, I wouldn't say any of this, but I'm not, so I'm open up. Because when you're a member of the government, you're by law not political, despite what a lot of people say. But I'm a private citizen now, so I can say what I want. We have very strong allies, great traditional allies that we helped in many ways create them as democracies through the Marshall Plan and the U.S. engagement and the commitment to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and so forth. We have big alliances around the world with very, very important countries. And we should be careful about destroying those relationships because those people look to us for leadership and so forth. so there's a lot of bluster, there's a lot of criticism, there's a lot of bullying, and there's a lot of attacks on our traditional allies that very, very much concern me, because I think it's unfair, and I think it confuses our allies, and it frankly weakens us. Because we have a president right now who's not welcome in London, England. It's unthinkable, because of the criticism and so forth. A president who has talked about NATO being obsolete. Look, these people are our friends. They're our allies. They have stood with us in tough times and good, and we ought to think long and hard about offending them. And we should never lose sight of who our strategic adversaries are. Number one is Russia, and then we have others. We have a very complicated relationship with China, but we should never lose sight of the fact that China is an autocratic country. It's not a democracy. Now, we have a lot of economic relationships with them, and a very important relationship, but compared to our relationship with Europe, it's not even close. So I'm very concerned about the position of the United States today. I think we'll change, because it's in our interest to keep our friends and be wary of our adversaries. Sir. No. First of all, I'm way too old. Listen, I'm looking for young, new leaders. We've got an age group of leaders right now. Some of them are very good. I mean, Joe Biden. I was in a meeting last week where he was there, and he's very sharp and all that. But Joe's 74 years old. Hillary Clinton is in her 70s. We need Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and a lot of the Republicans are older. I would really like to see some, dynamic, young, 40, 50-year-old people start emerging from governorships and state senates and all that kind of stuff. To me, the country needs regeneration of leadership, and so the next generation. Now, you're not that generation, but you may be the next one. So y'all get out there and do good stuff. Yes, sir.
Okay, for somebody considering military service as a career or a stepping stone after college, do you have any really good advice?
Well, it was good for me. I have two sons who were in the military. One stayed, and one stayed 3 years and left. And the one that left, he wanted to do something else. It's not for everybody, but you don't have to commit yourself to life to do it. If you really, really love it and you think you will absolutely want to make it a career, try to get in one of the service academies. If not, ROTC, and get a commitment for 2 or 3 years and see if you like it. But even if you're only there for a short time, it teaches you a lot, about yourself, because you get challenged, and it teaches you a lot about leadership of other people, because you do that. And those are skills that will last you a lifetime. I don't want to sound like a recruiting sergeant, but it was pretty good. Brian, I don't know how long you want me to. I'll stay up here and do this a long time.
I have to say one thing, because Nettleton is the best in our community at supporting veterans and those that are active in the military. I'm not just saying that. I really respect what y'all do. Can you talk about the importance of that and kind of the challenges that
Well,
military face compared to how it used to be?
this is a volunteer military right now, and so oftentimes they go out and do stuff for the country, and that other people don't have to get involved in it. I mean, it was a completely different situation in the 60s when everybody had to serve. And, Vietnam was very unpopular. We had thousands of people marching in the streets because in opposition to the conflict. After that, I think in the second Gulf War, we might have had a similar situation, but since the military was all voluntary, it wasn't affecting most people. There's a cost for military commitments to combat, and the cost is in human lives. It's very expensive to the country, You cannot have a war and cut taxes. There is no free lunch, so you got to pay for what you do. And sometimes those costs can be long-term and pretty extreme if the soldiers are injured and require long-term care. I was out at A-State. A-State's got a wonderful program going now to help veterans. It's not easy. And these folks come back, and some of them seriously injured, and you know, we've got to care for them. So, but I've found the country is very supportive of veterans. We used to fly in to Baltimore, where they have these flights that go to Afghanistan and back, and these flights can arrive at 11 o'clock at night from Europe, loaded down with soldiers that are coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan. And as they come out of the terminal, there would be people lined up welcoming them home. Very touching. And this could be, late at night, and the people are lined up out there. So there's great sympathy and appreciation by the people of the country for veterans, and you can really feel it around here. I mean, it really is welcome. And I can tell you that it's one thing to stand up at a ball game and honor the veterans. It's another thing to do something more than that. And so to the people that are actually supporting these vets, my hat's off to them. But I honestly believe the country is very committed to our military service and soldiers and sailors, airmen, and it's wonderful to see it. Listen, it has been great to be here and talk to you all. Very bright students. Very, very impressed with this school, and I know you're all going to do great things ahead of you. So thank you very much for listening to an old guy tell war stories.